of not one book, not one volume, 2 volumes with 3 parts. So thank you for being here, and let us begin with our rector, and maybe for the last time as a rector. So thank you, Father Nazar, and please come.
Still 2 more days.
2 more days.
Welcome everyone to the Pontifical Oriental Institute. Every year we have a certain number of conferences. Even before COVID, we used to have about 8 a year. And some of the conferences are on very detailed matters. A Syriac word, what did it mean? How was it translated into other languages? What conflicts arose in a certain council because of lack of understanding across languages? Very detailed, academic, very fine research work. Other conferences deal with more politicized themes. We had a 3-day conference on the situation in Syria. So this was in 2015 or 16. Mm-hmm. A day on the religions, a day on the politics, and the day on a prophetic future of these countries. So it's religion and politics and history, urgent questions of our time. We'll have a conference like that in the next year on how do churches respond in a time of war, because our field of study, it's almost all in war or under the threat of war. These books that we're talking about today happen to touch all of the themes. They touch language, they touch history, they touch politics, and they touch conflicts within the church. How do we understand ourselves? What is our mission? How can we be faithful to our mission in a world of complex politics, history, language, structures of various kinds? The volumes that are being presented today, in my judgment, in many people's judgment, are extraordinary because they delve into a theme that's hard for churches to deal with on their own, in their own countries of origin. But one of the blessings of a place like the Orientale is that we can discuss these themes without the politics, without taking a side. We can bring experts from all the religious denominations and groups and countries, nationalities and languages, and have a conversation that makes sense, that leads us towards the articulation of a kind of truth that we can all live with or learn from. So great compliments to the people who wrote articles, who revised their articles, the editorial team of Father Jelko Pasha and Father Edward Farrugia, and all those who are assisting in the compilation of this volume. And this will be an important conference for us, not only for today, but for the future of our church, in the broad sense of the word church. So once again, welcome, and buon lavoro a tutti.
Thank you. Yeah, let us follow with Father Pasha, the Dean of the Faculty of Theology. Please.
Your Eminence, Your Excellence, dear professors, dear students, distinguished colleagues, I'm very glad that today we finally can present to you the monograph dedicated to autocephaly. This comprehensive work, published in 2 volumes, within over 1,300 pages, is the result of collaboration with more than 40 scholars from various academic institutions and Orthodox churches. I am very grateful for this fruitful collaboration. Moreover, I am also grateful to the many other scholars who help us with the peer review processing. Their feedback was very important to ensure the quality of this book. Although I cannot name them, their efforts are very much appreciated. We also need to thank the colleagues who help us in translation of several long chapters into English. One is here. Improve the language or correct Greek or Church Slavonic quotations. The support was very, very important. Special thanks go to our managing editor Jarek for his excellent work in text editing. And of course, great thanks to Father Farrugia for his patience in collaboration with me during these 5 years as we work together on the volume. This monograph, what we present today, provides a systematic overview of autocephaly. It details its historical development, liturgical and canonical connections, and discuss current questions. The book is divided into 3 parts. The first part explores the history and development of autocephaly. It's even volume 1. In the volume 2, there is another second and third part. The second part is dedicated to the science of unity and tries to explain how all these autocephalist churches are one church and how they are in unity with each other. The third part is collection of different topics related to autocephaly. To give better understanding of these 2 volumes, we have organized the presentation as follows. The first speaker, Professor Kalkanjeva, will present the first part of the book, historical context. The second speaker, Professor Hroon, will present the second part, science of unity. The third part will be presented by 2 speakers, Father Erickson, who is with us online from Arizona in United States, and for him, this is 9 hours difference, about 6 o'clock in the morning, 6:30 in the morning. So Father Erickson takes to wake up so early and be with us. And the second presentation of the third part is His Eminence Kyrillos, Metropolitan Bishop of Krinin and Exarch of Malta. Speaking on the third part, they will each reflect on the volume in general or in some selected topics. Thanks for your attention.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you, Father Pasha. I think we can begin with this session by presenting Professor Dr. Daniela Kalkanjeva, a distinguished senior research scholar at Sofia University, St. Clement Oritsky, Bulgaria, specializes in the history of the Eastern Orthodox, mostly in Bulgaria and in Russia, and their relation to the state, the public sphere, and interconfessionalism. Examples of her profuse writing are the monographs The Bulgarian Orthodox Church and the State, 1944-1953 of 1997, and the Russian Orthodox Church, 1917-1948, From Decline to Resurrection of 2015. Besides various contributions to autocephaly, her teaching at the PO here is focused on the modern and contemporary history of the Russian and Balkan Orthodox churches. Professor Kalkanjeva will present part 1 of the autocephaly volume, Historical Context. The floor is yours, please.
Thank you. So, Your Eminence, Your Excellency, Reverend Father Rector David Nazar, Reverend Fathers and esteemed professors, dear students and guests. 18 years ago, I was asked to drop autocephaly. Thank you. To drop autocephaly from the title of my public lecture because the hosts were afraid that the audience wouldn't understand this word. Today, the situation is completely different. And I would like to use the PowerPoint. Okay, thank you. So, this diagram built on Google Scholar data from the studies containing references to word autocephaly, shows an increase of over 100 times in the average number of annually published publications since the end of the Cold War. Besides, the total number of publications issued only in the last 5 years is generally equal to that of the publications registered between 1990 and 2018. This rapid growth has been accelerated by the granting of autocephaly to the Orthodox churches in Ukraine and North Macedonia. Invited by the editors, the Reverend Fathers Eduard Farrugia and Željko Pasha, to present the first part of the collective monograph, this is the first volume actually, which is dedicated to the historical context in which autocephaly has emerged, I would like to outline the contribution of the participating authors to the study of how this ecclesiastical status was defined and practiced, adopted and recognized, abolished and restored throughout time and space. The first part consists of 26 chapters organized into 3 sections. Each of them follows a chronological approach, combined with due respect for the church tradition and canons in the first section, dealing with the ancient patriarchates, the different contexts in which autocephaly has been granted to non-pentarchical churches in the second section, and the role of civil authorities in promoting new autocephalies in the third section. The first section is dedicated to the ancient, The first section is dedicated to the ancient churches of Constantinople, Alexandria, Antioch, and Jerusalem, whose patriarchal dignity remained undisputable throughout the centuries. This approach takes into account their role in laying down the ecclesiological principles and canon law of the early church, as well as their belonging to its Eastern Orthodox branch. From the point of view of the present debate on autocephaly, especially significant is the contribution of the ancient patriarchates to the development of the principle of collegiality of bishops, not only within the universal church, but also within a given ecclesiastical province. Furthermore, in contrast to the other members of the family of Orthodox churches, the place of the patriarchates of Constantinople, Alexandria, Antioch, and Jerusalem in the diptychs was fixed by the first ecumenical councils and additionally consolidated by their service as pillars of pentarchy. In this regard, the chapters contribute to a better understanding of the relationship between autocephaly and pentarchy before and after the Great Schism of 1054. Furthermore, the chapters pay special attention to the impact of the impact of the historical experience of the ancient patriarchates on the evolution of the idea of autocephaly and its functioning. In this regard, the authors point to the polemic interaction of the Orthodox patriarchates of Alexandria, Antioch, and Jerusalem, also known as Melkite churches, with their rivals, the non-Chalcedonian churches. They also analyzed the role of Catholic incursions in the former Ottoman territories as triggers for changes in the relationship between the ancient patriarchates. In parallel, the impact of politics on autocephaly-related practices is discussed from the perspective of the relations of the Orthodox churches with different political setups: Byzantium, the Mamluk regime, the Ottoman Empire, the Russian monarchy, the British protectorate, and modern nation states. Among the merits of the chapters in this section, I would like to single out their contribution to the study of such less explored issues as the transition from autonomy to autocephaly, the loss of autocephaly, the introduction of issue of autocephaly in modern civil law. While the first the first sections discussed churches that didn't become autocephalous but were autocephalous, in John Erickson's words. The second section, deals with churches that have been granted autocephaly. This section deals with the so-called non-pentarchical autocephalies. In tune with the focus on the historical context, the chapters are chronologically organized. In the cases of churches that have been granted autocephaly more than once, the earliest act is considered. This approach, as well as the author's attention to the peculiar features of each of these churches, lay the grounds for future analysis and comparative studies. Taking into consideration the current canonical status of the existing non-pentarchical autocephalies, the second section is divided into two subsections. The first embraces the 10 Orthodox churches whose autocephalous status has been recognized by all autocephalous churches. So there are too many, and I organized them in 2 slides. While the second subsection deals with the 3 churches still struggling for such recognition, namely those in America, Ukraine, and North Macedonia. This approach allows readers to trace the spread of autocephaly across time and space, as well as to grasp the evolution of both the idea of autocephaly and the manner of its implementation in different churches. To present all the scientific merits of the 13 chapters in this section in a few minutes, it's a mission impossible. Still, I would like to illustrate the complexity of the historical study of non-pentarchical autocephalies by sharing some insights expressed by the authors of the commented chapters. Let us start with the Church of Cyprus, whose autocephaly, recognized by the Council of Ephesus in 431, preceded those of Jerusalem and Constantinople. Its case is at the heart of several precedents that have left their imprint on the other non-pentarchical autocephalies. One of them stems from the conciliar definition of the fundamental principle of autocephaly, the right of a local church to ordain its bishops without let and hindrance. No less a peculiar feature is the disentanglement of autocephaly from patriarchal dignity. We can discover this model in the Serbian autocephaly of 1219, as well as in many modern Orthodox churches. The Church of Cyprus also offers an example of the survival of autocephaly in exile, an experience that raises the question about the authority of ancient patriarchs over the faithful in cases of mass migration. The volume also casts light on the Georgian case, which is widely underrepresented in the international historiography. It is another early autocephaly, but in contrast to the one in Cyprus, has emerged outside the political and ecclesiastical control of the Roman Empire. Furthermore, it is necessary to point out the contribution of the chapters on the Georgian, Bulgarian, Serbian, and Russian churches to our knowledge about the relationship between autocephaly and patriarchal dignity in different political circumstances. Another aspect of autocephaly demonstrated in the cases of Slavic Orthodox churches points to the tensions between Constantinople and Rome and the political developments as key factors for the establishment of new autocephalies, either self-proclaimed or canonically granted. In this regard, the historical accounts presented indicated that the smooth adoption of autocephaly is an exception rather than the rule in both medieval and modern times. Very often, the road to autocephaly goes through schisms, whose variety is well depicted in the second section. Besides the chapters dealing with the churches, the churches that have been proclaimed autocephalous more than once cast light on the issue of loss and abolishment of autocephaly, which has remained in the periphery of scholarly analysis. Furthermore, the chapters point to a correlation between modern state sovereignty and the autocephalous churches of the autocephalous status of the modern Orthodox churches. Introduced by independent Greece in 1833, this pattern can be traced in almost all autocephalies that have emerged since the era of nationalism. Moreover, it can be traced not only in states with Orthodox majorities, but also in those where Eastern Orthodoxy is a minority religion. Among other issues, the chapters contribute to a better understanding of the various relationships between autocephaly and language, vernacular or liturgical, autocephaly and the historical memory of past autocephalies or apostolic origins, autocephaly and state territory expanded and reduced, etc. Finally, the last three chapters offer a unique opportunity to compare the cases of Orthodox churches in America, Ukraine, and North Macedonia, whose autocephaly has obtained only partial recognition. In addition to their contribution to the ongoing debate on the granting of autocephaly, they stimulate fruitful comparisons between the autocephaly building process that followed the collapse of the Ottoman, Russian, and Austro-Hungarian empires, and the one triggered by the disintegration of the Soviet Union and Tito's Yugoslavia. The third section of the volume opens a new field of study. The chapters offer an overview of the role of civil authorities in the promotion, negotiation, and recognition of autocephaly in empires and empire-like bodies. They discuss autocephaly-related practices in the Roman Christian Empire, the Ottoman polity, the Habsburg monarchy, the Russian Empire, and the Soviet Union. This collection of studies will stimulate further research on the influence of civil authorities on the evolution of autocephaly as a concept and practice in different historical epochs and different socio-political circumstances, as well as religious and even atheist environments. To present the conceptual richness and fruitful ideas expressed in this section, it is impossible in the short time allotted. Thus, I would like to draw your attention to several insights that would be especially inspirational for the study of autocephaly. The first of them concerns the entanglement of early Christian theology with the political ideology of the Roman Christian Empire, which resulted in a vision that the existence of the church was impossible without an emperor. In this regard, special attention deserves the extraordinary role of the Roman Christian emperor in producing new autocephalies headed by archbishops. It seems that this capacity stemmed not only from the idea of the sacrality of his royalty, but also from his right to regulate the relationship between civil and ecclesiastical dioceses. No less valuable is the chapter discussing functioning of the Orthodox Church under Ottoman rule. Having its roots in Islam, the Sultan's administration provoked a reorganization of the local Orthodox community, which changed its traditional ecclesiastical structure and the very idea of autocephaly. In its turn, the Catholic Habsburg monarchy presented another set of challenges to its Orthodox subjects. The religious freedoms granted and the right of self-government didn't lead to the establishment of a single Orthodox church in that empire. Instead, coming from various ecclesiastical and cultural backgrounds, joining the empire in different periods and occupying different geographical areas, the subjects of the House of Habsburg were organized into 4 parallel Orthodox jurisdictions. Moreover, historically affiliated with different church forms of government, their status varied from autonomy to autocephaly without being always arranged in tune with the Orthodox Church tradition and canons. The Habsburg case also raises the question of school, cultural, and financial autonomy as an element of modern church self-government. After the Ottoman conquest of Constantinople, the Orthodox Russian sovereigns, stimulated by an ambition to present themselves as heirs to the Byzantine emperors, also left a peculiar impact on the concept of autocephaly. In this regard, I would like to single out the contribution of the chapter on the Russian Empire to the underexplored issue of the relations between the Russian Orthodox Church and Eastern Patriarchates. Finally, the Soviet case points to specific forms of misuse of autocephaly, which were influenced by militant atheism and geopolitical interests of the Bolsheviks. During the interwar period, they artificially created pseudo-autocephalous churches in Ukraine, as well as in Georgia and Belarus, as tools for undermining the religious zeal of the local Orthodox believers. Meanwhile, the shift in Stalin's attitude towards the Russian Orthodox Church during the Second World War brought about a geopolitical approach to autocephaly. As a result, the Moscow Patriarchate, under the Kremlin guidance, started promoting new autocephalous churches abroad. To sum up, the 26 chapters in the first part create a marvelous collection of historical studies on autocephaly, which traces its evolution from early Christianity to nowadays and covers all currently functioning autocephalous Orthodox churches. In this endeavor, the authors and the editors of the volume cast new light on the role of interchurch and church-state relations in shaping the modes of understanding and functioning autocephaly in time and space. In short, the volume will become a key reference handbook for church historians and other scholars exploring this Orthodox phenomenon. Thank you for your attention.
Okay, now the floor is open for questions if you have some. So we have 10 to 15 minutes.
Yeah, thank you very much. I'm not sure if this is the right question to begin with on this topic, but first I should say that congratulations to all the people involved in this volume, which really is an amazing resource. Even the index itself is quite impressive, and I was flipping through now and looking at one topic, nationalism, and the slide that you showed about this section where the state involvement in autocephaly. It struck me that here we have Christian monarchies and also atheist governments, and yet in the index, the topic of nation building only appears in the chapter on the Patriarchate of Jerusalem, which is quite interesting, which is beyond either of those regimes. So I'm wondering if you could elaborate maybe a bit more on the question of nationalism, and particularly I'm interested in the 20th century and the involvement of an atheistic regime in promoting autocephaly, and how this then connects with theology or not.
Thank you. Does it work? Okay. It works now. Okay. So somehow I didn't pay a lot of attention to, didn't elaborate a lot on nationalism in my presentation because of the shortage of time, and I wanted to bring your attention to new things. Well, at first glance, there is a lot of studies on nationalism and Orthodox churches in relation to autocephaly, especially the most famous is this case of the Bulgarian ethnophilitism, which was condemned by the Church Council in Constantinople in 1872. But while reading through the chapters in this volume, I realized that this link between autocephaly and nationalism appears in concrete, in specific conditions, not always. First of all, it is a new development, but also it appears in in churches representing national majorities, like Serbian, Bulgarian, Romanian, but there are churches where we don't see such kind of nationalism. So this link between nation state and nationalism in relation to autocephaly seems to be a specific development in specific circumstances and so on. We don't find such a strong relationship, for example, in the case of Polish Orthodox Church or the Orthodox Church in Czechia and Czech Republic and Slovak lands. Also quite interesting, in the Middle East, we have kind of Arab nationalism, but not, it's not connected with a specific state. So this is one of the things. The other thing is that it seems that the nation states that have an Orthodox majority, they need to exploit this nationalism and through the churches from national consolidation to build the new states and to have this consolidation of the people in the country, often at the expense of other religious groups and so on. And also, it's somehow, there is kind of paradox. The nation states fought for the autocephaly of their local Orthodox churches, but once these churches became autocephalous, the nation states started ruling the churches, intervening. So the autocephaly somehow liberated the church from Constantinople, to say, but at the same time conditioned subjection of the local Orthodox churches to the state authorities and made possible the misuse of this autocephaly for local, sometimes also for geopolitical aims. And the other thing I want to mention that especially in the case of Ukraine, because now it's a hot topic, while working on my paper, I found out these pseudo-autocephalies, especially mushrooming in Ukraine under the Soviet rule. And actually, the Soviets used these pseudo-autocephalous churches organized in Soviet Ukraine to fight as a kind of, as part of this struggle against religion. So they mushroomed these autocephalies just to disappoint people from these constant schisms in the church, and also they use these autocephalies to suppress the idea of Ukrainian national identity, because in the Ukrainian case, especially in the first years after the Bolshevik Revolution, Ukrainians connected the idea of autocephaly with the idea of national identity. And therefore, discrediting autocephaly, Bolsheviks tried to discredit also the national idea in Ukraine. So this is something interesting which I think needs more studies. Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Doctor. I've been told that Father Eriksson has something to say from abroad. Yes, please.
Thank you. Can I be heard?
Yes.
Is my microphone on?
Yes, yes, we hear you.
Good, thank you. In the opening paragraphs of her fine chapter on the Bulgarian Orthodox Church, Halkandieva asks a series of questions that she goes on to answer in her text. Why was the Bulgarian exarchate simultaneously relieved from the burden of schism and declared a canonical autocephaly? Why did the other Orthodox churches automatically recognize this double act of Constantinople? What were the results of the granting of this granting of autocephaly? We may notice some similar questions arising with the emergence and re-emergence of several other autocephalies. And with the suppression of autocephalies. And this leads us to ask, what does autocephaly really mean? I mention this because in our 2019 conference on autocephaly, Father Andrew Louth and Thomas Bramer and others question whether there is any ecclesiological depth at all in the notion of autocephaly. Father Louth put it this way in his position: if we look back at the history of the Church, we do not find the emergence of a notion of autocephaly that gradually takes on shape and definition. And whose parameters can be deduced from the historical development of the Church through the centuries.
Father Erickson, excuse me, can you delimitate the question? Because it's time of question now, and then you will have the floor.
I have one line left.
Okay.
The question is, in an attempt to justify national churches that emerged as they threw off an unsuspecting past, is there depth to the idea of autocephaly as it comes to be practiced?
Thank you for the question, but there is kind of delay, and I am not very sure I understood correctly what you said, but there is kind of problem between how autocephaly was understood in the antiquity or until the fall of Constantinople, the Ottoman conquest of Constantinople, and modern autocephaly. And while reading the chapters, I realized that autocephaly somehow in the past was because you mentioned ecclesiology, it was considered as a method of administrating a certain ecclesiological province, something like this. But in the modern time, we see another relationship between autocephaly and territory. Now, this because in the past we had autocephaly within kind of administrative borders, And now in the modern times, we have autocephaly somehow linked with political borders, either imaginary, like in the case of the Bulgarian Orthodox Church, we imagine that the Bulgarian Exarchate should embrace all territories considered to be Bulgarian and then to be included in future Bulgarian state, or with specific state borders, like in the case of Romania, later Yugoslavia, or Romania, or Serbia. So there was this modern autocephaly has this link with political borders, and it is really less ecclesiological than political, something like this. I don't know whether it is exactly what you meant, but sorry.
Thank you. Thank you, Prof. I think we have time maybe for short question. One more question, please.
It seems to me like despite the fact that autocephaly means autonomy, we can see in modern Orthodox churches, especially in these smaller ones, like some gravitation toward more powerful centers. Like in maybe now it's orientation towards the Russian Orthodox Church or to the ecumenical patriarchate, like to some referent point. And so my question is, in your opinion, is this gravitation to some referent point, is this the weakness of autocephaly, or maybe the reasons of this need of strong oriental point in this reason leads somewhere else, or maybe this is this geopolitical connotation of autocephaly that was created only nowadays. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you for the question. Actually, the orientation of the autocephalous churches to different centers can be traced already after the Bolshevik Revolution, but it was more like Slavic churches started distancing themselves from the Patriarchate of Constantinople, but somehow at that interwar period, this process was still, it was kind of one of the tendencies. It wasn't a strict line of development. But after the Second World War, there was this clear linking of autocephaly, especially because of the policy of Kremlin and Stalin. The autocephaly became a geopolitical issue. So since then, we have it, this misuse of autocephaly as a tool for geopolitical games and aims, something like this.
Thank you. Okay, let's go with our second speaker, Professor Dr. Basilios Grun. His career is variegated. Editor, teacher with focus on Eastern Christian liturgy and ecclesiology, mainly in Graz, where he held important offices, and a UNESCO chair for intercultural and interreligious dialogue, respectively 2008, 2014, and 2007, 2019. His interest in people and study leads to his desire to break barriers and to portray theology with insight. After giving the Donoy lecture here at PIO in 2014, he taught liturgy with a keen interest in the students. His publications are very numerous, but his work on Kazantzakis, orthodoxy and liturgy shows his passion and versatility. Professor Grun will present part 2 of the Autocephaly volume, Signs of Unity Among Autocephalous Churches in Liturgical Canonical Praxis. Yes, the floor is yours, Father Grun.
Good evening. After Daniela Kalkanjieva has dealt with 36 chapters, my task is pretty light. I got only 5. We say in Dutch, klein maar fijn, small but beautiful. So let's go for it. The first of these 5 articles in this section on liturgy and canon law has been written by a Romanian Orthodox scholar, Radu Barăniu, Unity in the Orthodox Faith. What he is doing is speaking first, outlining the difference between unity and uniformity. And he calls as boundary markers in a complex situation the Eucharist and the councils. He develops some thoughts about the recognition of ecumenical councils, what an arduous process this has been. And then he comes to speak about autocephaly itself, but not without criticism, because in one side he adds that autocephaly is being endangered of being overtaken by autocephalism, which is not what autocephaly should be about, true autocephaly. He also points out that the Orthodox Church has many, many great features, but there is one tremendous danger which he describes, and he calls that the danger of fundamentalism. These are his words. He then discusses the Council of Crete in the year 2016, and comes to speak about the theological dialogue between Orthodoxy and Oriental Orthodoxy, between Orthodoxy and Roman Catholicism. And he ends, despite, you've heard, despite the critical notes that he also has in his article, he ends in a pretty optimistic way, namely, we are making progress, and please let us go on in this way. Another, as you have seen, this is a pretty broad approach taken in this first article. The same broad approach is taken in the second article, written by the American Orthodox theologian, a member of the Orthodox Church in America and a deacon, Nicholas Denisenko. Nicholas Denisenko describes the Eucharist and Orthodox ecclesial unity. How is the dialectical relation between the Eucharist and Orthodox ecclesial unity? He makes a broad flight. He starts in early Christianity. He touches upon the topic of the diptychs, a topic that will later extensively return in the article written by Stefano Parenti, and we will get to that soon. He moves on to the topic of concelebration and describes its horizontal and vertical dimensions. What does he mean with vertical? He means this is the union of the earthly and the celestial liturgy, the earthly church and the celestial church. And horizontally, he means the entirety of the faithful. He then touches upon the prothesis. The prothesis, an important part of the Byzantine Rite Eucharist, and moves on to the topic of intercessions in the anaphora, in the Eucharistic prayer. And then comes a very, I would say, a very topical remark. And you may have heard of him, because he has addressed this issue also on other fora. Namely, he warns against the danger of weaponization of the Eucharist, weaponization of the Eucharist. What does he mean with that? He means that if there is a row, if there is a serious problem between different churches, and that this may lead to tremendous tensions, that in the wake, in the context of these tensions, the Eucharistic communion is cut off, is ruptured. We all know what has happened between the Ecumenical Patriarchate and the Patriarchate of Moscow, and what is still happening. And in the wake of this conflict, let's put it that way, in the wake of that conflict, also other Orthodox churches have become involved, like the Patriarchate of Alexandria, the Church of Cyprus. Well, what he is basically doing, Denisenko, is not taking sides, not saying, well, this party is wrong and so on, but he says, please, please, let's be careful. And he quotes Archbishop Anastasios, the primate of the Church of Cyprus, in that respect. He also refers to the Bulgarian schism, to the Bolsheviks, we have addressed them, to Ukrainian Orthodox Christianity. And again, he ends in a theological note. He ends with pointing by eschatological unity and the rogation may all be one. Then, as third contribution, and outstanding in my view, a text written by Stefano Parenti, the liturgical topi, the Greek word, the loci, we say in Latin, the liturgical topi of ecclesiastical communion, diptychs, commemorations, and acclamations. He first addresses the issue, but what are diptychs? And he distinguishes between the diptychs for the dead and the diptychs for the living. In a meticulous historical survey, very detailed, he describes what has been understood as diptychs of the living and diptychs of the defunct. What I personally find very interesting is that he builds on a large amount of scholarship that has been done in the previous centuries, but that he tries to carry it on. And he has, well, not the courage, it is just a sign of good scholarship as I see it. He revises some of Robert Taft's thesis. He also revises some of the theses held by André Jacob. And this is a sign of health, of progress, as I have judged it, reading it. This is a sign of scholarship advances. We recognize the greatness of scholars before us, but we move on. We build on them, and we go on. He then describes the Theotokos. That may surprise us, the Theotokos, the supplications to the Theotokos. But in his view, the supplications, the commemorating the Theotokos is part of the diptychs. It's not only Greek and Slavonic tradition he's addressing, but it's also the Latin tradition. And of course the Italo-Greek tradition. He then comes to speak of the commemoration of the episcopate, of the commemorations at the Great Entrance, and I'm sure all of us are familiar with these sometimes long commemorations during the Great Entrance. Then he speaks about the acclamations before and after the Trisagion, and then concludes with a number of concise conclusions. Yeah, and then I come to speak of my own article. That is a bit ambiguous, of course. I can describe it, but I'm not going to say this is good or not so good, or who am I? I leave that up to you to assess the quality of that article. Anyway, my little person. And, well, let me tell this. When I had written a great part of it, I thought, well, I cannot do this alone. I should not do this alone, because I'm dealing with orthodoxy. I should not do this alone. I should ask an Orthodox colleague who is very good and very skilled and do it together. So I asked my colleague Chrysostomos Nassis of the Aristotle University in Thessaloniki, would you mind doing it together? And we did. We set out on a common enterprise, and we wrote the article together. And for me, that is a sign of what Robert Taft called ecumenical scholarship. The fact that the Catholic and an Orthodox work together on this enterprise has been very stimulating for both of us, and we've learned a lot from it, and I hope so will you when reading the article. Anyway, what is it about? We first make an historical overview. We point to the high significance of chrism, miron, and then we describe, and I must say, writing this article has given me lots of fun. You know, I love oils. I think some of you know that. I have a kind of feeling for oil and chrism, and whenever I can learn something about oil and olive oil, I'm very anxious to do that. I wrote my first thesis at the University of Nijmegen about faith healing. I wrote my doctorate on the anointing of the sick in the Latin tradition, and I wrote my second one on the anointing of the sick in the Greek Orthodox tradition, and I've been fascinated with oil ever since. Anyway, we describe then extensively the current procedure in Constantinople. How is the confection and consecration of miron, of chrism, taking place in the ecumenical Petercade? And then we ask the question of questions. Or to put it differently, the mother of all questions, which is so important for this volume. And what is the mother of questions, of all questions in this concrete case? Does this confection and consecration of chrism contribute to unity in the Orthodox world or not? We have not been able to answer that question unequivocally, because we have noticed, and we present the evidence, that in some cases, yes, consecration of chrism is a sign of Orthodox unity, a very strong sign of pan-Orthodox unity. But the very fact that some Orthodox churches, among which is the greatest, I mean numerically the greatest, will not take their miron, their chrism from Constantinople, but make it themselves, the Patriarchate of Moscow, shows already that this sign, that the confection and consecration of chrism is not 100% a sign of unity. It would be great, and perhaps who knows what will happen. And the consecration of chrism is also done, an autonomous consecration is also done in Bulgaria, in Serbia, and of course, as we know, in Ukraine. Then we describe the consecration in other churches, in the Armenian tradition, in the Syriac, in the Eastern Catholic. And then perhaps you would say, well, that was it. No, that is not it, because it is not only in the Roman Catholic tradition an established custom, but more and more also in the Communio Anglicana, in the Anglican communion. Confection and consecration of chrism is an important event. And Perhaps it will surprise you. The same thing in the Lutheran Church. We have a liturgical movement in the in the Lutheran Church that has led to the adoption of many other liturgical elements and the consecration. Sometimes it's also a matter of terminology. The blessing of chrism is part of it. Also in the Reformed Church. So we try to describe that. And then we go to the Roman Catholic tradition, which we describe extensively. And in particular, the annual chrism mass that takes place during Holy Week. And to wind up, we outline similarities and differences between the Orthodox practice of confecting and consecrating chrism and the Roman Catholic practice. A couple of differences are striking immediately. In the Roman Catholic Church, the consecration of chrism takes place every year. In the Orthodox Church, no. Only whenever need arises. In the Orthodox Church, the consecration of chrism is a matter of the primate. Is a matter of the primate of the church. In the Roman Catholic Church, every local bishop has the right to consecrate chrism. And of course, in the Roman Catholic tradition, the chrism mass has also been connected to the renovatio, the renewal of the sacerdotal vows, which has thrown a new light in the eyes of some of my colleagues, a controversial and contentious light on the annual chrism mass. This is what we did. What we did not do and what we have not done is we wrote this article a couple of years ago. And in the meantime, there have been new developments. One such development is what has happened in Ukraine. The fact that the Ukrainian Orthodox Church, in connection with the Moscow Patriarchate, has tried, we don't enter into details, to loosen its ties with the Moscow Patriarchate, and in that context also the consecration of chrism has been discussed. But I think for you the most spectacular moment might have been, have you seen the coronation service of King Charles III? Well, when King Charles III was crowned, for many, and I think for him too, one of the most spectacular moments of the coronation service was the unction with chrism. And this chrism was prepared especially in Bethlehem. It has been blessed 3 times. It was blessed in the Greek Orthodox Patriarchate of Jerusalem. And interestingly, we found that out. It has never been communicated, but we found it out because of the pictures. And you know how we found out? On the pictures, they have used the anointing of the sick service to bless the oil. There are several blessing prayers in the anointing of the sick, and that's what they used in the Patriarchate of Jerusalem. Anyway, then the second blessing took place in the Anglican Church of Jerusalem. Then this sacred oil, chrism, was transported to London, where the Archbishop of Canterbury blessed it again. So the chrism King Charles has been anointed with was blessed 3 times. Well, you know the proverb, all good things are 3. And of course, also Queen Camilla has been anointed, but we never saw that on TV. But she was anointed on her forehead, Charles was anointed on his breast, and on a couple of other body parts. So this is a development that has taken place afterwards, but it has raised, because there has been lots of speculation in social media, in whatever, in English tabloids. What kind of oil was that? What is chrism? Why chrism? And so on. So it has certainly heightened the interest for our topic. Then the final chapter has been written by one of the 2 editors of this book. Father Edward Barucha. What he is doing, again, a broad survey of communication between autocephalous Orthodox churches. And as I said, he addresses a broad range of topics like synodal decisions, Irenic visits, one primate visits another one, Irenic letters. And he starts at the very beginning. He starts with the apostles. He goes through Ignatius. He addresses the not so easy topic of the Pentarchy. Then he goes to Peter III of Antioch, who tried in the 11th century the upcoming schism between Rome and Constantinople. He addresses Balaam. And he ends his impressive review with a striking sentence. And that striking sentence is, small gestures can speak louder than words. And I think his article provides a lot of evidence for this statement. Let me wind up with a couple of, how much time do we have? Okay, I'm going to wind up, and we will have time later. A big compliment for the layout, excellent editorial work, big compliment for the ecumenical scholarship that has been shown throughout this book, throughout this study. And of course, my section, only these 5 articles, is small, but it is significant. Why is it significant? Not for personal reasons. It is significant because the relation between liturgy and ecumenism is foundational. Theological dialogue is important, but liturgy serves as a bridge. Many people celebrate liturgy. They do not know too much about theological dialogues, but they celebrate the liturgy. And in diverse traditions, East and Western, we celebrate the salvific acts of Jesus. And of course, liturgy also shows the separation. Sure, that's true. Liturgy may also confirm the separation, but at the same time, there is so much potential in the liturgy to serve as bridges between our churches. I will stop here. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Yes, we have 7-8 minutes for questions if you need.
In a chapter of the Nicenco, what you mentioned, Eucharist is used, he mentioned as Eucharist is used as a weapon. According to your opinion, if there is something else which can be used as a weapon in the same way or with the same strength as Eucharist, what do you think?
Did I understand correctly if you ask if chrism may be used as weapon?
No, you can.
Beside the Eucharist, if there is something else, what can be used as a weapon?
Yeah, that's a good question. Well, of course, communion. Communion, it belongs to the Eucharist, but communion can be refused. Persons can be allowed to communion, but people can also be refused to get communion for reasons that are not always so clear. They may be very political, they may be moral, but who decides on what is moral and what is amoral? I've seen situations where a priest refuses communion to someone of whom he thought that this person should not get communion for whatever reason. That was very unclear to me. I personally regard that as a kind of weaponization. At the moment where someone shows up in front of you It is very difficult, I think, to refuse that person. Anyway, that is an example. Let me see if there are other examples. Well, the funeral, of course. The funeral. I have seen examples of people in Germany and Austria of Catholics who formally left the Roman Catholic Church. Although they said we still believe, but we for whatever reason, now this is a long story, for whatever reason, then they die. The local parish priest, usually, as I have seen, buries them. I've also seen cases of parish priests who refuse to bury that person because they say he's no longer a Catholic. Is that weaponization? Perhaps, perhaps not, because there are strong individual cases. And that's my final example, the Council of Nicaea, the first Council of Nicaea in 325, explicitly says that at the moment when someone dies and asks for Holy Communion should not be refused to this person. It should be given to him or her. I know of cases where that has not happened. I mean, the person asked for it, but he or she did not get it because the cleric in question thought that this person should not get it. I call that a weaponization of the Eucharistic communion. Well, these are pretty, yeah.
Thank you. Thank you. Father Galazza, please.
Thank you. I'm very interested in your chapter on chrism, and I have the book, so I was flipping through. And ecclesiologically and historically, I was always under the impression that there are many things that originate from the practice of every bishop that then get taken just to the head of a local church, and there are some things that were the purview of just a special bishop that all bishops get. So, for example, a sakos or polystavrion was reserved for special bishops. Now everyone can have it. And I was under the impression that chrism was the thing that every bishop could do and then gets absorbed to the head of an autocephalous church. In many there's, for example, some manuscripts, even at the Vatican, where it has the chrism, and it seems to be in the context of the use of any bishop, or even in some Greek Catholic churches, until recently, every bishop could do it. And now, on the model of the Orthodox, the head of the local sui juris church took it as his purview, and I thought this was a lack of the emphasis on the local church, that the bishop is able to do it historically. But I'm interested, maybe you can comment, because if I understood your conclusion, that this is seen as rather a Latinization, that every bishop does it, or that it's done every year, and that the current Orthodox practice is the more authentic one, that every head of a church does it. So maybe you can comment more on that. Thanks.
Yes and no. No, because in one respect, the Roman Catholic practice is older than the Orthodox practice. The narrative is often the other way around, as all of us know. But in this respect, the Catholic Church, the Roman Rite, is more ancient than the current Orthodox Byzantine Rite, because that is the original tradition. But then in the Orthodox East, it became more and more common as a kind of centralization that the Patriarch of Constantinople absorbed these functions to him, reserved these functions to him. So centralization, as we know, is not only a Roman feature, it's also a very strong Byzantine, Constantinopolitan feature, as we know from many, many other instances. So that's one. Then I said, yes. What was the other way? No, I said yes, and
you
I
also
said
said
that,
no.
and then I said no. But what
I don't know. That's why I agree. I agree with your yes. I agree with that part of the answer, and that's why I was curious that if I'll have to read your chapter with great attention, but the narrative you presented now, I thought that was the one.
The second part of your question was, is that a Latinization?
Yes.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Yes, in a way it is, because it has become a practice in Eastern Orthodoxy that the confection and the consecration of chrism is reserved to the protos, By the way, in this respect, I think Orthodoxy, we can learn a lot from Orthodoxy, also in this respect, because the Orthodox make chrism real chrism. What we do in the Roman Rite is usually we have olive oil, we have a bit of balsam, and usually that's it. Sometimes we add something else, but that's usually it. It does not smell. It's just, it hardly smells. But the miron in the Greek Orthodox tradition, well, that is really something. Sometimes they add 60. There are complete lists of what is all added in the ecumenical patriarchate. And I think we could learn a lot from that if chrism really has to be an odor, as in the New Testament, it says an odor for you, well, let's do it. And what we could also learn from Orthodoxy in the Roman Rite is to confect it. Our Latin rite, Roman Rite, Ordo says, Ordo conficiendi et consacrandi chrisma. Conficiendi. What does conficere mean in Latin? It means to make it, to confect it. So it means that you have to add all kinds of fragrances and make real chrism. And which bishop is doing that in the Roman Rite? Hardly anyone. They leave it up to the sacristan or to some acolyte or something. You do that. Do that a couple of days before, and then. But that is not what liturgy is about. Let the bishop do it himself. It showcases what conficere chrisma really is.
Thank you. You talked about your enthusiasm about chrisms as we see it now. Yeah, Father Erickson, do you have a question before leaving the floor to you?
Well, I did submit one earlier on the subject of chrism. Can I be heard?
Yes.
Yes, I guess I can be. Again, chrism in the Byzantine East was related to autocephaly, and to autocephaly, the idea that only an autocephalous church can, or the church should receive chrism from Constantinople. This became a kind of tax. One has to look at the economics of chrism. Chrism is expensive with all those ingredients.
Very expensive.
And the difficulties of transportation.
Yes.
And the complications of preparation itself.
Yes.
At Dumbarton Oaks a few years ago, there was a presentation of a St. Petersburg perfumer's expense account. How much it costs to acquire the ingredients. It's little wonder that the dependent churches that were getting chrism adopted measures for conserving their supply. They would water it down. they would carefully wash off chrism as fast as possible so you keep it.
But there is no question.
Yeah,
It is not question.
The question is, what are the economics of this, and to what extent is it a fundraising enterprise?
Good question. Important. The Patriarchate of Constantinople never begins, as far as I know, the procedure which they carry through about once every 10 years without sponsor aids. So they make all kinds of requests throughout the Orthodox or the Greek Orthodox world within their orbit of raising money, so that they can carry out this important function. And it costs a lot. Yes, that's true. You are from Bulgaria. Well, you know how expensive roses oil is. And that is one of the ingredients of chrism. And so there are many expensive ingredients that has to be paid. Yes, and it is also costly, because after the confection and the consecration, chrism has to be transported all over the world to parishes, and that costs a lot too. Yes, this is a very basic element.
Okay.
If there is time, just a
Yes,
small remark that relates to this question. First of all, when Bulgarians were schismatics, they dissolved this miron with olive oil during this time of schism, until the Russia started supplying them, but they use olive oil to dilute the miron. This is about the economy. And the other thing is that somehow this rose oil is, again, weaponization of the rose oil, when the Bulgarian church uses this rose oil in this diplomacy and contacts with Constantinople. There is always rose oil as a gift to the Patriarch of Constantinople. Just a small remark.
Yeah, thank you. Okay, let's go forward with our third speaker, the very Reverend Professor John Erickson. Thank you for being with us, Father, for waking up so early. He is canonist, historian, and ecumenist. He has played an important part, especially among English-speaking Christians. In 1973, he started teaching canon law and history at St. Vladimir's Theological Seminary. His gift as a communicator makes his numerous writings both profound and interesting, of which his work, The Challenge of Our Past of 1991, is an excellent example. Dean of the seminary from 2002 to 2007, he continued afterwards to teach in ecumenism. He seeks reconciliation by exploring in depth seemingly conflicting solutions. Professor Erickson will present from his perspective part 3, or he will share the part 3 with His Eminence about the Autocephaly volume, Theological, Canonical, and Historical Reflections and Perspectives. Father Erickson, the floor is yours.
Thank you. Again, my task is somewhat different from those of others speaking here. I was asked to introduce part 3 of the collection. And I would like, first of all, to congratulate Father Edward Farrugia, Father Zielko Pasha, on completing this enormous project. I've known Father Edward for what I believe from was his first year at the Pontifical Oriental Institute in 1981, when we marked the 1550th anniversary of the Council of Ephesus. and the 1530th anniversary of the Council of Chalcedon. Father Jelko I've known less long, but I've learned a lot from him, and I know he's preparing another conference at the Pontifical Oriental Institute to mark the 300th anniversary of the Melkite Schism. I mention this because anniversaries can be difficult occasions, especially when they mark painful events. Consider, for example, the anniversary that was marked by a book presentation at the Institute last year. The Lviv Sobor of 1946 and its aftermath toward truth and reconciliation. Pursuit of truth and reconciliation in our day has had mixed results. Many people nowadays are asking with Pilate, what is truth? But while we acknowledge the provisionality of our own work, honest scholars still pursue truth. We owe a great debt of gratitude to the Pontifical Oriental Institute for not shying away from difficult issues, for cultivating an atmosphere in which constructive encounter is possible. But however devoted to truth we may be, reconciliation, whether of Orthodox and Catholics or of Constantinople and Moscow, may not be inevitable. Often, as we pursue truth, we are told that we have a moral duty to remember, especially victims of atrocities like the Holocaust or Holodomor. Never forget. But possibly we also have a duty to forget, and not simply for utilitarian reasons, not simply to give us some breathing space in the wake of trauma. We may remember too much and for too long. We may remember obsessively in ways that are unhealthy for all concerned. You may know the old Irish proverb, long after the quarrel has stopped making sense, the memory of the grudge endures. And as I'm sure many of you will agree, we Orthodox are very good at grudge maintenance. We remember the Frankish sack of Constantinople in 1204 and many other events of the past very vividly. We celebrate the heroic virtues of our ancestors. We excoriate the low cunning of our ancient adversaries. We project these mythic memories onto our present situation as a way to explain and justify our own actions and passions. And at the same time, we are inclined to forget atrocities in which we ourselves have been complicit. So in many ways, our lives, Orthodox and Catholics and others, are unhealed. And this is something not altogether new in church history. Many of you may remember Henry Chadwick. He was the distinguished church historian, veteran observer of the ecumenical scene. He was fond of remarking that the chief reason for Christian division today is division itself. Whatever may have been the issues leading to division, once established, division quickly takes on a life of its own. differences that in themselves may not have been church dividing are invested with new meaning. They become symbols of division rather than of legitimate diversity. There are many examples of this in antiquity. There are many examples in the course of Orthodox Catholic relations. And now there are dawning elements of that in inter-Orthodox relations. Will this tragic scenario also play out within global Eastern Orthodoxy as we know it? Given the current wars, given polarization on multiple issues, will constructive encounter ever be possible? In our section of the book, in the part 3 of the collection, we gather together many contributions. We gather together a number of papers that were presented at the 1969 conference. We gather together also presentations that were solicited on related themes. I cannot present all of them in any great detail. I would like to call attention to some of them that deal with notions of place, the meaning of local, and what is a local church, and how different these meanings may have meant, how different this situation was in antiquity. The situation in antiquity, in the ancient city, because the city was the center of people's life, the man or woman of antiquity could experience the work of Christ in very tangible ways. Tangible ways in the church where it was effectively proclaimed and realized not just within the structures of the church, but also by them. The means of proclamation and realization were one with their essential contact. Consider the situation of men and women today. With modern urbanization, more of us live in a city. That doesn't mean we are of the city. Today's city dwellers often have arrived only recently from a native village, because their company has been transferred to a new location. They're refugees from homelands torn asunder. Whatever their lives, their identifications may be very different from antiquity. Modern human beings are mobile and rootless to a degree unmeasurable in antiquity. And our great cities of our world are amorphous and anonymous to a degree unimaginable in antiquity. I mention this because we are challenged today to find structures for communion, common activity, and witness that go beyond the dichotomy of local and universal, we're called upon to, in this coming, to imagine the church as it can be in our own times. No doubt, territorial entities such as the parish, the diocese, perhaps even the autocephalous church, the local church as we know it today, will continue to play a major role, perhaps even a preponderant role, but in themselves, even if considerable effort is made to express Catholicity, unless adequate and effective communication is established with other groups, with other territorial entities, with groups that are not territorially based, not only ethnic, linguistic, economic, professional groups, also non-governmental organizations, service agencies, advocacy groups, lifestyle enclaves like monastic and religious orders, brotherhood, support groups, special needs groups. How is it possible for us today to express the full breadth of the church and its life? The breadth of our church. Eucharistic ecclesiology has tried to do that, and our conferences and several of the presentations in the course of our conference, 1996, 99, whatever it was, they dealt with this issue. But what we don't find, what we find in this is what may lead to hierarchical communion and to Eucharistic communion, but does this in itself lead us to witness and service in the world of today? My own paper at that time and my own continuing interest has been not to continue and not to develop Eucharistic ecclesiology all gathered in one place, because the notions of place become rather difficult in our present situation. It's important to develop a baptismal ecclesiology, one that recognizes the church is indeed a Eucharistic organism, but only because the church is a baptismal organism. The church is born of water and the Spirit to be in the world, but not of the world. Not imprisoned in the structures of this world in the way that it has been during much of our period as autocephalous and enmeshed in governments that can be oppressive and hinder our lives as really baptized, witnessing Christians. We have to remember, we talk in this a great deal about the need for building community. Early Christians knew that this community could be nothing other than a community of faith. It meant renunciation of idols. It meant catechumenate, training in faithful life. It didn't just involve learning how to refute the filioque. The challenge in our own time is to recognize also the ethical implications of baptism, to be willing to die, to be willing to die up to the world. We have been, I'm getting feedback all the time here. The difficulty is, for many of us, we're living in a post-Constantinian world. That world that once, whether Catholics or Orthodox, that world is gone. And how are we as Catholics, Orthodox, and others, how are we to be Christians today? This is a question that is facing churches in different ways, in different places. I would like to mention just briefly some of the concerns raised in the papers. The papers of the gathered together raised questions about what it means to be a local church. And we must recognize that local churches really very often differ one from another, and we should be able and willing to accept these differences. Many of the presentations dealt with the question of the so-called diaspora. And dealt with situations of mission, for example, Christianity and Orthodox Christianity in Africa, sub-Saharan Africa, in Asia, and Catholics have these questions as well. We must be willing to love these places and not just perpetuation of our own preferences in oils and perfumes and beautiful services. One of the contexts, one of the diaspora contexts in which I live is North America. This was also where for example, Father Alexander Schmemann, others involved, exponents of Eucharistic ecclesiology, lived and worked. And I think experience of life in these situations for any length of time will convince people that these are new situations, so that they cannot be comprehended simply as diaspora, something not conforming to old world autocephalies. I'll close with some words from Father Alexander Schmemann. One of our writers for this conference spoke of him as a Russian theologian. I didn't think of him as a Russian theologian. He spoke French as often as he spoke Russian. Russian was his first language. English was not his best language, but he was perfectly articulate in English and had a real love for the peculiarities of America. He writes, "Now the unique particularity of American Orthodoxy is that it became a living encounter after centuries of mutual isolation and even alienation of virtually all Orthodox traditions, of all treasures accumulated throughout centuries, land of immigrants. America is therefore the land where the heritage of some can become the heritage of all, where, in other words, a living synthesis becomes the very form of life. The question is it possible to be truly Orthodox in such a place, or truly Catholic? I think in our present time, we should recognize that we are all living in a diasporic situation.
Yeah, it's done.
Yes.
You're finishing with this. Thank you, Father Erickson. I feel like you have something to say or not.
I only wish to say, I keep hearing myself. There is such a time lapse.
We can understand this, and we thank you, really. We thank you very much for attending and sharing with us this conference. I leave the, okay, do you have a question, please, Father?
Father Erickson, thank you very much for your time to be with us so early. So now we will pass to the questions, and I would like to ask you exactly about your topics. What you spoke, what you discussed 5 years ago here in 2019. It's about how the debate on autocephaly changed ecclesiology. It's also your chapter. So from 19 until today, we have about 5 years, exactly 5 years, yes. So, do you see that in these 5 years we have some changing in ecclesiology, or in this period it's not changed? So during these 5 years we had a lot of discuss. It was a lot of discussion, a lot of publication, a lot of articles, a lot of meetings. So in these 5 years, can you see it's something change on ecclesiology? Thank you.
I do see some things change. One is that the situation of global orthodoxy is more difficult than it was. The situation of orthodoxy then was hopeful. We thought that a holy and great council might have positive results, or might still pull through results. We didn't know. We didn't anticipate a war against Ukraine. We didn't expect the effective disintegration of inter-Orthodox cooperation. We didn't expect a pandemic. We did not expect vast flows of refugees, some political, some economic, some just starving, some victims of war. These changes in the United States, certainly in all of our countries, the other has come to us. The other is no longer off there someplace. The other is in our midst, and the other we must embrace or at least not fear. This is a very difficult change. This is new, I believe, in Italy. My children, my younger son and his wife go to Italy quite often. And each time they go, they find great differences. My brother-in-law and sister-in-law live in England. My brother-in-law and sister-in-law and their families live in England. The one thing that they say has improved is the variety of food. The food is much better. I haven't been in France lately myself, or in Italy. I have been in Spain and several places in South America. Again, the world is much smaller than it used to be, but it is also much more divided. I haven't been able to go to Russia for several years, or to Eastern Europe, really. My older son, who went often for research purposes, hasn't been for a long time now. The world has grown larger and smaller at the same time, which pushes us tighter together. I think that the needs, the tasks of the church are more challenging now because we face conflicting models or molds. I think of diasporic situations and the relations of national diasporas and their relation to their home countries. And I don't have answers or solutions. In Italy, there is a very large immigrant community, Romanian. It's perfectly understandable. The languages, the culture, very much should autochthonous Orthodox and Romanians become a united presence in Italy. Or would this, in fact, cut down on the identification of Romanians with the homeland and with remittances going back to Romania? Churches have divided responsibilities here, and it's a puzzle how to deal with this.
Thank you.
That's it.
Yeah, thank you. I think if we have some question, we can leave it at the end. So let's go forward. And we have the last, our bouquet final speaker, Bishop Kyrillos Katarelos. So His Eminence studied in various countries, thus acquiring fluency in languages, German, French, Italian, Spanish, Russian, and English, but also a doctorate in philosophy in Frankfurt am Main and a doctorate in theology from Thessaloniki University. The Synod of Constantinople chose him as Bishop of Abydos in 2008, and later, 2021, Metropolitan of Crene and Exarch of the newly erected Patriarchal Exarchate of Malta. Even then, he continues as full-time professor at the University of Athens. The numerous writings that go to his credit show him to be a much sought-after lecturer and author. His Eminence Katarelos will also present from his perspective part 3 of the Autocephaly volume, Theological, Canonical, and Historical Reflections and Perspectives.
Thank you. Your Excellency, Mr. Dean, dear professors, dear brothers and sisters, first and foremost, I would like to extend my gratitude to the esteemed editors of the collected volume Autocephaly, Coming of Age and Communion, Historical, Canonical, Liturgical, and Theological Studies, namely Professors Farrugia and Pasha, for their commendable effort in successfully bringing together such a challenging compilation and securing its publication through the Pontificio Instituto Orientale. Undoubtedly, the two volumes comprising this project feature scholarly articles of exceptional quality, serving as invaluable resources for researchers in the field. I wish to extend my heartfelt appreciation for the gracious invitation to submit my own contribution to this project, with particular focus on the third segment of the volume, Historical, Canonical, Liturgical, and Theological Studies. Within this section, a collection of 15 articles about different issues, penned by esteemed authors, left an indelible impression on me. It's worth noting that while we may not necessarily align entirely with the perspectives presented in these articles, my intention here is not to dwell on disagreements and fight with Russian Orthodox, but rather to provide a synopsis of my viewpoints and represent the positions of the Ecumenical Patriarchate, recording topics included in the volume as I was asked. The ongoing discourse surrounding autocephaly, a profoundly pertinent and intricate topic within the Orthodox world, demands a meticulous examination of historical sources. Specifically, it necessitates a deep dive into subjects such as primacy within the Orthodox Church, the geographical jurisdiction of each local church, and the interpretation of Canon 288 of Chalcedon, particularly regarding the privileges of the Constantinople throne, including the crucial aspect of appeal, appellatio, and the authority to adjudicate cases pertaining to other Orthodox churches internally. On December 26, 2013, the Holy Synod of the Church of Russia approved and published a text concerning primacy in the churches, as this is understood and recorded in the text of Ravenna, issued by the Joint Theological Commission for Dialogue between Orthodox and Russian Catholics, 2007. The position of Moscow Patriarchate can be said to focus on papal primacy, denying as it does any dominion of the Bishop of Rome across the Ecumenical Church during the first and the second millennium alike. the importance and validity of the canons of Sardica, which acquired ecumenical stature thanks to the second canon of the Queen's Synod, do not appear to have a bearing on the Russian text. It is known that the canons of the first and the second ecumenical councils conferred a primacy, a seniority, ta presbia in Greek, to the throne of Rome. Just as known is it that the canon on the second and fourth ecumenical councils bestowed upon the Church of Constantinople an equal primacy to the one given to Rome, thereby placing Constantinople second in rank. Primacy, seniority, was granted to specific ecclesiastic thrones in specific locations on the basis of the latter's political importance, missionary activity, and the ecclesiastical prestige they enjoyed for a number of reasons, such as apostolicity or its theological acumen and authority, or because of a combination of relevant factors. This is how the preference for Alexandria over Carthagena or of Jerusalem versus Caesarea of Palestine was justified. The honored thrones exercise jurisdiction in circumcised territory. Exercise jurisdiction in circumcised territory. This is why the Byzantine canonist Zonaras writes, quote, the ecclesiastical thrones honored enjoyed the privilege of primacy over the thrones falling under them, unquote. Thus, we have the formation of the patriarchal system in the administration of the Church and the transition from the metropolitan system, which was based on the provinces, to the patriarchal system. It is well known that each patriarchate constitutes now a local church whose function is regulated from Canon 34 of the Apostles. Orthodox and Catholics agree in the text of Ravenna that there is primacy on the local, eparchial, and global level. In contrast to Ravenna text and the understanding of the ecumenical patriarchate, the Russian side considers that primacy on a global level is not determined by the canons of the councils. This means that approximately 15 to 16 centuries after establishing the relevant canons, we Orthodox are ignorant of the content of primacy, particularly that of the first throne, specifically the throne of Constantinople, after the discontinuation of Eucharistic communion between Rome and Constantinople at the second half of the 11th century. This position does not mean only the isolation of the Patriarchate of Rome from the other churches, Orthodox churches who signed the text of Ravenna. That means that in the Orthodox world, there is not center to coordinate the Orthodox churches. Indisputable is the privilege of the throne of Constantinople to accept and judge irrevocably disputed differences arising in other churches outside its own jurisdiction. This privilege of the throne of Constantinople is paid on the sacred canons. It is confirmed by Byzantine canonists and interpreters, and it is testified by the continuous practice of the Orthodox churches that reaches to the present day. I will skip some pages. Canonically, as well as historically, the Orthodox conscience clearly affirms that the granting of autocephaly is an exclusive privilege of the throne of Constantinople. All churches that were not mentioned in the sacred canons of the first millennium, that is, except for the Patriarchates of Alexandria, Antioch, Jerusalem, and the Church of Cyprus, were granted their autocephaly but the Patriarchate of Constantinople, the Russian Church being no exception, and their canonical jurisdiction was clearly defined, outside which they did not have the right to act. Some of them, such as Serbia, Bulgaria, Romania, etc., also received their patriarchal status from the First Throne Church of Constantinople. To be sure, the granting of autocephaly is a different process than its subsequent recognition by the other autocephalous churches. When, after the autocephaly of the Moscow Patriarchate, autocephaly was given to the other 9 Orthodox churches in the 19th and 20th centuries, the Ecumenical Patriarchate did not ask the existing autocephalous churches if they agreed, nor did they make a such claim themselves. In fact, quite the opposite happened. When the Church of Russia attempted to appropriate Constantinople's privilege by granting autocephaly to the Church of Poland in 1949, even though autocephaly has been granted to it already by the Ecumenical Patriarchate in 1924, the attempt failed. Christopher, Patriarch of Alexandria, responded to Patriarch Alexius of Moscow as follows, quote, "We merely affirmed that we have received your letter, but not that we have recognized what was enacted by your beatitude and your Holy Council as consistent with the canonical life of the Holy Orthodox, Catholic, and Apostolic Church," unquote. Similarly, Archbishop Makarios of Cyprus asked Patriarch Alexius to respect this canonical order, thereby indicated that only the ecumenical throne is responsible for granting autocephaly, as not to disturb the peace between the Orthodox churches. It is actually noteworthy that the Ecumenical Patriarchate also granted autocephaly to provinces that did not belong to its jurisdiction. The most representative example is the Church of Georgia in its current canonical jurisdiction, which, liberated from the violent Russian intervention of the past, was finally granted autocephaly in 1909 by Constantinople. It is said, of course, that in 2008, when Russian troops invaded and occupied 2 areas of the Georgian state, Abkhazia and Ossetia, the Moscow Patriarchate prohibited the Georgian Patriarchate for exercising its jurisdiction over these areas. In conclusion, therefore, one can easily say, expressing Orthodox canonical thought, that according to standard method and practice and the entire canonical tradition, the granting of autocephaly belongs exclusively to the First Throne Church, among the Orthodox churches, this being the Ecumenical Patriarchate. The privilege of the Ecumenical Patriarchate to confer autocephaly is also based on Canon 288 of Chalcedon. All churches enjoy a specific and limited local jurisdiction, while the jurisdiction of the Ecumenical Patriarchate extends beyond this. According to this canon, the metropolitans of the Pontic and Asian and Thracian dioceses, like the bishops of the aforesaid dioceses, located amongst the barbarians, shall be ordained by the aforementioned Most Holy Throne of the Most Holy Church of Constantinople. Each metropolitan of the aforesaid dioceses, ordaining the bishops of the province as has been declared by the holy canons. Constantinople was thus not to consecrate the bishops in the barbarian areas within the 3 dioceses, but those beyond their borders, because if these bishops of the barbarian areas or people were within the territory of the three dioceses, then the canon unquestionably prescribed that the metropolitans of the diocese, and not the Bishop of Constantinople, had the prerogative of consecrating them. Under the canon, Constantinople only consecrated the metropolitans of these three dioceses, and it was the metropolitan together with the bishops of his province who consecrate new bishops of this province, as has been declared by the holy canons, in other words, as has been prescribed by Canon 4 of Nicaea. In summary, it is evident that the throne of Constantinople, holding as it does paramount rank and authority, traditionally possessed and still possesses the prerogative to adjudicate and determine cases emerging in other churches. Even today, when consulted, it upholds jurisdiction in what we now term the diaspora, retaining sole authority to grant autocephaly to a church. It is unfortunate that the topic of autocephaly did not emerge for discussion at the 2016 Synod of Crete. Metropolitan Job Getza elaborates on this in his paper. Clearly, there is a pressing need for an internal dialogue to occur within the Orthodox churches with a view toward ensuring that they remain faithful to the sacred canons and canonical tradition. While other topics discussed in this volume are relevant, space constraints prevent us from addressing them here. Nonetheless, it is important to broach the issue of self-proclaimed autocephaly. One notable instance is the establishment of the Autocephalous Church of Greece by Greek bishops following Greece's declaration of independence from the Ottoman Empire in 1833. This led to a rupture in ecclesiastical communion between the Ecumenical Patriarchate and the Church of Greece, lasting 17 years from 1833 to 1850. Another significant rift occurred later, spanning from 1870 to 1945, when ecclesiastical communion between the Ecumenical Patriarchate and the Bulgarian Church was interrupted. It is noteworthy that in both cases, the resolution of the schism involved the recognition of all previous sacraments administered during the schismatic period, thereby rendering their repetition redundant to the effect that even the ordination of a former schismatic bishop was validated. This practice was a precedent in church history when at the Seventh Ecumenical Council, Ecumenical Patriarch Tarasius welcomed back into communion the iconoclast bishops who had been ordained while being in heresy and schism. The affirmation of the correct faith sufficed without necessitating new ordination, baptism, or anointing. The position of the Ecumenical Patriarchate concerning the unschismatic Greek and Bulgarian churches brings about shift in the perception of schism. Following the insight of Saint Basil the Great, it is believed that within a schism, the grace of God is absent, rendering the sacraments invalid. Consequently, in the annals of church history, it would be more accurate to refer to these instances as disruption of communion rather than schism. The issue for the Orthodox today remains the Roman Catholic Church. The volume's last paper, written by Professor Destivelle, From Schism to Imperfect Communion, is very, very interesting. It is impressive that Destivelle adopts, or seems to adopt, the position of Pope Paul VI, conveyed in his letter to Patriarch Athenagoras, quote, "Since on both sides we profess the basic dogmas of the Christian faith. And since we have in common true sacraments and a hierarchical priesthood, we must first of all, in the service of more holy faith, work fraternally to find together the progressive and appropriate forms to develop and actualize in the life of our Church the communion which, though imperfect, already exists. It is unlikely that this optimistic viewpoint will find acceptance within the Orthodox community, the Orthodox world, particularly following the Synod of Crete in 2016, which affirmed that the Orthodox Church as the sole Church of Christ. While the Orthodox Church historically refers to other Christian denominations as churches, it does not recognize them in an ontological sense. According to Bishop Dimitrios Salachas of blessed memory, the Synod of Crete does not address the status of Roman Catholics, which was disappointing to him. It's important to note that Catholics are no longer considered heretics or schismatics, as was the case before the 19th century and the advent of the ecumenical movement. Instead, they are generally characterized as heterodox, with whom ecclesiastical communion has been interrupted. Given that the Synod of Crete does not recognize other churches in an ontological sense, it becomes challenging to speak about an imperfect communion between us. Hopefully, in the future, the Orthodox will master the fortitude to acknowledge how close we are one another. Once again, congratulations to the editors. Thank you.
Thank you. So we have maybe 10-15 minutes, if you want, for questions, whether to His Eminence or to other speakers.
Thank you very much for your talk. When you mention the chapter of Padre Destivel, I had in mind also the chapter of Professor Murzaku. She is unfortunately not with us, at least here, probably she's online with us. She contributed the chapter with the title From Schism to Chrism, speaking about Autocephaly of Albania, Orthodox Church in Albania. So from schism to chrism, from schism to unity. So as we had the opportunity to hear also in the talk of Professor Kalkanjeba, it seems that it's something, especially in 19th, 20th century, majority of these autocephalous churches pass this process from schism to unity, from schism to chrism. So how you explain this process of unity and independency?
It's well known that the Chrisma is a sign of unity in the Orthodox churches. And in the Tomos of Autocephaly, in almost all the Tomos of Autocephaly, is written that the churches has to take the Miron from the ecumenical patriarchate. If I understood well, it is not easy because the ingredients of the Miron are expensive, and I don't know to comment. I don't know.
My point should be on first it should be schism,
Mhm.
so that from schism we build unity.
I mentioned cases in which people who were in schism came to the canonical church without schism. And I mentioned the example of the iconoclasts. They entered the church without ordination, without new baptism, without charisma. It's possible. The same after the resolution of the Bulgarian schism in 1945. The same, I could say, in 2008, when the church, the abroad Russian church, united the Patriarchate of Moscow without, only a service, a liturgy.
Yes? I have a question, if you allow me. It's about, it's a special topic that has been touched by Father Erickson, but yourself also, Your Eminence. It's about the modern diaspora. It's a modern diaspora. The concept of canonical territory, it seems to be not as we used to know. So it is, it would be like not against the Canon 8 of Nicaea. How can we reconcile, or how can we interpret or reinterpret the Canon 8 of Nicaea in the modern diaspora? We cannot accept anymore the old concept of diaspora, of the outside the ecumenical world.
If I remember well, the Canon 8 of Nicaea says that in its
the ecumenical world
must be only one bishop. Only one bishop in each. Yeah.
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 May I add to this? There was similar discussion in Russian emigrant churches in the interwar period about this Metropolitan Evlogius in Paris, and then there was this polemic between him and Metropolitan Antony Khodorkovsky. The supporters of Evlogi said that the canonical territory is connected with the bishop. So this is he connected with the bishop, not with the church. So it seems to me that it is a modern development.
We cannot have we should have only one bishop.
Yes, yes. This is, but because today we somehow transfer this rule to the church. We have this autocephaly is like canonical territory is now connected, especially I mean the theory, the concept of the Moscow Patriarchate canonical territory. It is connected nowadays with church, while originally in the canons it was connected with the diocese of bishop. So it is kind of transfer.
But where is the bishop, there is the church, says the Saint Ignatius.
We remember that this has been a discussion and discussed between the Catholic Church during the Vatican II about the overlapping of jurisdictions between especially the Maronite Church and the Melkite Church. So, and the Maronite point of view was no, it's at the canon that one the church, one the bishop, and one is the church, and one is the people of God of each local eparchy. While other Eastern churches, Eastern Catholic churches, had their own point of view that saying that it's not anymore possible of this if we want to protect and to develop our own own tradition, patrimony of our church. And at the end, they couldn't. The Maronite point of view was not accepted, because they said it's not anymore, and it's open. This is why, for example, in several cities we can say several bishops of Catholic Eastern bishops, or Latin also, in the same territory.
You can see
I
a lot
think-
of Orthodox bishops in the same territory.
I think we will have this problem also with Orthodoxy. Yes, please.
I have one comment about Ecumenical Patriarchate, and in the case of Autocephaly to Church of Dodecanissa in 1929-30, when in the Vatican archive there are some documents about this, when Italian authority asked Autocephaly, and Italian ambassador 1930 spoke with Apostolic Delegate Margotti and said everything was ready, also money to give to Patriarchate Basilius III, but the problem Patriarch was dead. And the new Patriarch, Photius II, is not agree with this Thomas. And ambassador asked Apostolic Delegate to help Vatican in this question. Delegate said, no, this is not our methods to work. And in September 1930, in Apostolic Delegate come Ambrosio Stavrinos, Metropolitan of Dercon, and asked help to delegate and said, can you give me money and I will make propaganda anti-Photius, and if I can Patriarch, I work for unity with Rome, and also I will give Thomas to Dodecanissa. And it's so interesting answer of Apostolic Delegate. We don't have these methods. The return of dissidents to really church is opera of Holy Spirit, not of money. It's an interesting case because now I'm researching in Vatican Archive this case of Autocephaly of the Church of Islands of Dodecanissa.
Yeah, thank you. Yes, please.
Well, Your Eminence, you explained the transformation from the metropolitan system to the patriarchal system. So we saw that there were many historical factors that they guide the church to this system. Also, these factors are changing. For example, the importance of the cities of Rome and of Constantinople. But when Rome was not so great city, the church respected its position, the position of the primacy of Rome, although Rome as a city was much smaller, much weaker. So I would like a comment in the new tendencies in some interpretation of ecclesiology that make under doubt a lot of decisions of synods that make this primacy to the throne of Constantinople, and now they are trying to make under doubt this importance of this historical line, also giving a greater importance to Jerusalem as the first church in the history of Christianism. And I would like your comment about the criteria, how when we respect the synods and the decision of synods, and when we can understand why there's a new ecclesiology based in different criteria, doubting all these past decisions of synods. Thank you.
According to the canons and the canonical tradition, the throne of Constantinople is the first in rank and has the primacy in the Orthodox world. And of course, it is kind dogma, it can change. But until we change it, we must respect it. The Orthodox churches, for the moment, are not capable to come together and to discuss. It's impossible due to the reason of Ukraine and other reasons. But the question is why we should change the center of Orthodoxy. Why? This is the first question. And then, if we have the answer to this question, then we can find the successor of Constantinople, the Third Rome.
Okay. Okay, if we don't have any more questions, we can leave the final word to Father Farrugia to wrap up all this marathon of reflection on the book.
My title is Sine Fine Decentes. It comes from a preface of the Latin Rite used for the angels who praise God without end, but when it is used outside of that rite, it means somebody should be short. And therefore, I'm not going to give another paper. I am going to let my hair down, but since I don't have much hair, it is going to be short. So, to find the right word to finish is much more difficult than to find the first word to start. A speaker's or a preacher's ending sounds at times like a forced landing. It is not uncommon that a British Jesuit begins with, well, as Father Erickson did in one of his questions, if you listened carefully. Well, our book on autocephaly had a long introduction but has no conclusion. Just as the granting of autocephaly usually has a very long period of waiting and a relatively short celebration on its being proclaimed. But again, what can one say in short about a work which is 1,126 pages long and took 4.5 years to finish? If I dare take a guess, no book of the in the monograph series in which it appears, Orientalia Christiana Analecta, is so long, although here are works that is in the Analecta with several volumes. And then, how are we going to judge such a work, especially since Selbstlob stinkt, say the Germans. You know, to praise oneself is not nice. Chi si loda si imbroda, si dice, one says in Italian, meaning pretty much the same. On longer reflection, however, a criterion came to me which enjoys the kind of grassroots infallibility of the proof is in the pudding. Namely, if you had to go to a desert island and could take with you only 10 books, would you take with you Autocephaly? Of course not. Of course not. The question sounds ludicrous. But it knows of better variants, like if you had to go to a desert island and could only take 10 books with you, to which desert island would you go? And of course, this too may sound like a ludicrous question, but it can be improved. Desert island may well recall the Italian word for island, isola, and isolated. There are those who pretend to be open-minded while refusing adamantly to listen to someone intelligent and fair describing the opposite view. And this is one big conclusion. Excuse me, I'm admitting also my limitedness. This is one big conclusion I drew from having to read again and again these articles of Autocephaly. It was for me most useful, an object lesson in how to discuss and how to carry out a discussion, as I saw carried out in these 2 volumes. Believe me, it was. Even because if you have to do the work again and again, you can't miss the lesson. And I thank, therefore, all those who wrote, the authors, who showed great prudence in marshalling their arguments. Anything else comes close to the isolation of a desert island. The purpose of the method chosen was not only to treat as far as possible the themes treated with scientific objectivity, but also in such a way as at least to be able to discuss it. Streitgespräch is the word in German for discussion. A misleading word because it literally means a quarrelsome, discussion, talk. It's not quarrelsome, but it's meant to be serious. Going back to the foundations, though the word is not understood that way, generally speaking, as I say, usually people in Germany don't think Streitgespräch means we are going to fight. For us, the discussions are meant to help create a peace plank, because the beginning of reconciliation has to start with the acknowledgement of the facts, of the history. Believe me, as I listened to all 4, my heart went out for them. I had to repress my questions, of which I would have had several, because I rather wanted to listen and not to say, look. Of course, the facts themselves are not sufficient, even in dialogue. We speak of non-theological facts which are extraneous to the problem. And in linguistic analysis, that philosophy which analyzes language, it is not the facts which clinch a deal or resolve an issue, a great lesson for me, but the attitudes, the emotions, if you like. An example often given by these linguistic analysts, whom I got to know in the United States at close quarters, a strike often ends not because employers and employees agree about whether the pay should be raised, but whether the pay factually has been raised. The agreement in the attitude rather than in the facts. And this, for me, is a comment on current ecumenism. For all my love for it, for all my appreciation for it, I feel some reflection on it in depth could improve the thing. About the discussion now and its conclusions, much has been said, and I don't want to add anything. From this, I would go even a step further and say that even before conceding the wage raise, it is the fact that parties to a disagreement agree to sit down around the table and argue about the problem that is usually the first step towards searching for an answer. And that our contributors did, and again, I thank them. It is not little, to send your paper to peer reviewers. And one of them was very honest, quite a famous author. I don't want to mention him without his permission. But he told us he wrote an article. And he sent it. It was sent then by the editors through press reviewers. And it came back saying, this author has to read X. But X was the man who had written the article. This is true. I'm not making it up. And this from Getcha, from Bishop Getcha, I could give you some more examples he gave me. So that. Now, knowing what a time-consuming and ungrateful task it is to do peer reviewers, I take the occasion to thank also the peer reviewers, because it's an ungrateful thing. You know, when they ask me to peer review, it takes me sometimes more than an article, because you don't want to offend, but you want to help. Okay, so finally I come to my vote of thanks, as the Indians like to say. Therefore, I start with thanking the prefect. He couldn't come today, but he sent us his secretary, and we are very happy to have Monsignor Shalach with us. He will be ordained bishop on the 9th of June, I believe. 8th. I hope I won't come a day too late. Okay, so then I thank director. Actually, it was director who gave us the idea. He being a Ukrainian, he told us, don't talk only about Ukraine. Make a symposium. Another man I want to talk is Father Pasha. You know, I learned from him many things. I'll give you an example. Previously, in my age, I used to drop boxes. Then I learned what a drop box is. I found to my amazement that quite a number of experts in computer don't know what Dropbox is. Yet, at any rate, he was really, you know, we two have two different characters, but we got along very well. And I thank him because, you know, he also pushed in a very important way an important idea. I would only add one thing on this. It's very good, but look, it took us 4.5 years. Therefore, I would wish that we could do the same thing for the non-Byzantines. You know, it's not that I'm criticizing. We said it, that we had to do that to finish in time. But I would like that all churches would be analyzed in such a loving and deep way to let us know what they are about. Okay, then I thank those who translated for us, and even translating is not easy when it's very technical. I hope I didn't leave anybody out, but I want to mention one person who really deserves a huge, huge thank you. Jarek, who is there, you know, our...
Yeah.
Please. Never have I seen anybody who takes our works as if it was his own. And he does it in such a humble spirit. And also very efficient. Really, I feel in conscience I'm obliged, bound to repeat this because it's only too true. Finally, I want to thank again all those who spoke today. All spoke from the heart, and if it weren't that we have a time limit, I would have made many questions. But I felt there are others who have a right to do them.
Thank you.
Thank you very much, all of you.
Thank you. Thank you. Yeah, I still have two info before concluding. First, joyful, we are all invited to the refreshment now. And the second one, for today, I think only for today, the books are, the price is 90 instead of 120. So a special discount for today. So if you want, you are encouraged to buy the books. Thank you again.
Okay.
Excuse me? Father Erickson? Oh yes, I can thank you again and again, Father Erickson, from Arizona, I think so. Huh? So thank you for it's. You can take breakfast now, I think. No, okay. Thank you.
Thank you.
It's time for breakfast.
Je dois rentrer à Athènes aujourd'hui le soir.
Thank you very much.
À Athènes.